Hi, welcome back to First Church of God. Thank you for joining us here today. So glad that you've taken time out of your day to be part of our day. Always a joy to hear from you and be around you. There is a series out or a teaching that's been out for a number of years called Love and Logic. And in Love and Logic, it says that there are three styles of parenting. They describe them as helicopters, sergeants, and counselors. And what the writers say and what they believe is the helicopter parent is the type of parent. What does the helicopter do? They search and rescue. So a helicopter parent is one that is always rescuing their child. The child forgets their lunch at home and the parent has to drive to school and take them their lunch. Then the child calls again and says, I forgot my homework or I forgot my library book, and the parent has to make another trip. So the parent is constantly doing this rescue of their child. And not only are they rescuing, they're enabling the child, and the child doesn't learn to be responsible or take initiative and make good decisions. Another part, the second type, the sergeant. What does a sergeant do? A sergeant is in charge. They bark out their orders, their soldiers salute, and they do as they are told. Here's the difficulty, here's the problem. Those that had sergeants for parents, they never learn how to make decisions. They're always used to being told what to do. I like the third style, and I've tried to use it in a lot of ways in my life. It's called the counselor. And the counselor looks at the child and says, wow, you have a very interesting problem. What do you think you should do? Or if it were me, this is what I would do. But, you've got your choices, and you understand that there will be consequences if you don't make the right choices. Now, what I've discovered in my lifetime is most people parent in the same way they were parented unless there is a desire to do something different. And it seems to me that the helicopter and the sergeant parent desire for their children to come out okay or be a productive part of society, but they don't realize the captivity they are actually making for their child. When something or someone that is meant to be free is placed in captivity for a prolonged period of time, it can develop permanent habits that it makes very difficult to break these permanent habits. I've read that one particular time the Denver Zoo was getting ready to have a polar bear exhibit, and as they were preparing the area and building the area, the polar bear arrived way too soon. And what they thought would just be 3 months of the polar bear, or 6 months being in a smaller area, turned into 3 years. And in that smaller area, the polar bear could only take a few steps in one direction at a time. So he'd take a few steps forward, a few to the right, a few steps back, a few to the left. And he got in that pattern of making that square day after day after day. When the polar bear exhibit was finally ready and he went out into his new domain, where there was a waterfall, there was a pool, there was all sorts of things he could explore, he made a few steps forward, a few to the right, a few back, and a few to the left, and he kept repeating that. He didn't understand the freedom that he had gained. Now, there's an opposite perspective on this. When I was in college, there was a student that arrived, a freshman, and like the polar bear, he had been under some great restriction. When he was growing up, he had to sit in the same pew as his parents, or one before or one after. He couldn't just go and sit anywhere he wanted in church. And there were other great restrictions upon him throughout his life. He wasn't handling his freedom very well. One weekend, he went and went back home, got his car, drove back to the college, and within a week, the car was totaled. He didn't know how to handle not having the restrictions that he was used to. And within a month, he was kicked out of school for breaking some of the rules. I believe we all have our fears, and some of those fears serve us well. They protect us from abusing the freedoms we have. For some people, they were raised not so much under strict restriction, but they were taught to follow the rules, to not stretch the boundaries, but to respect the authorities in their lives. When we are busy, when we're stressed, we operate more in survival mode than we do in anything else. Some call that part of the brain that we use the reptilian part of our brain, meaning that a reptile is not capable of loving you. Reptiles live more in survival mode than they do anything else. There's another part of our brain, and some people refer to this as the positive dog of their brain, and which when activated, it focuses on gratitude. When we pray, we use the positive dog part of our brain. When we give unconditional love, we are experiencing that part of our brain. So that's why it's called the positive dog, because there is unconditional love there. Here's the danger. Your fear, the reptilian part of the brain, can eat the dog. One of the things I talked about last week, one of the things we opened with, we talked about fear. And the word phobia is connected to the origins of the word fear. We're told we need to face our fears. Now, I don't really totally agree with that. I do not see any practical application of me going and touching or holding a snake or a reptile. Just don't need to do that. And I believe that one of the ways that we can increase our fear, but a lot of people try to hide this, is pride. The way of thinking of pride is self-love. As we stated in last week's message, we overcome fear with love. 1 John 4:18, perfect love drives out fear. Self-love is not only prohibits true love, but it also destroys love. If you are able to squeeze self-love like it were a sponge, you would drain out fear, unbelief, mistrust, conflicting thoughts and feelings, anger, hurt, untruth. But what's the common culprit in all of those? And that is that there is a lack of true love. When an individual focuses inwardly on themselves instead of outwardly on God and others, it becomes self-love. If you want to know if you're a person of self-love, look at your checkbook, look at your calendar. What do you spend the most time doing? What do you spend your most money on? Listen to yourself talk sometime. What do you tend to talk about? Do you talk about others or do you talk about yourself? Who do you allow others to talk about? Jesus said this in Luke chapter 6, verse 44. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. And an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. How do we overcome fear? Through love. 1 John 4:18. Perfect love drives out fear. We also learned that we can overcome fear by laying down ourselves, laying down our lives for a friend, laying down the old self of who we were before we came to know Christ, before we came to new life. And we demonstrate love towards others, not expecting anything in return. Also, we learn from that we obey all that God commands. That's what love does. It calls us to obey what God commands, and we walk in victory over the condemnation we used to be under. And because Jesus has set us free, then we need to elevate our eyes off of self and onto Jesus, onto heaven, not the crazy that's going on around us. One day in the life of Jesus, the mother of James and John came up to Jesus and said, "Hey, someday, when you come in your glory and everybody's in heaven, could my sons sit to your left and right?" And in his gentleness, Jesus said, "No." The disciples weren't too happy with her request or what their sons were thinking. And to calm the room, Jesus said in Mark 10:42 through 45, Jesus called them together and he said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Love is a strategy to overcome fear. Now, there's another strategy to overcome fear, and it's mentioned right here in this passage. Jesus didn't come to be served, but to serve. We believe that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And Jesus says, I will love and I will demonstrate love in how I serve. And people will know you're my disciples if you love one another. Romans 5:8, God demonstrates, present tense, his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, past tense. Because we love, we serve. And when we serve others, we fill their cup with love. And as we fill their cup with love, our cup is being filled at the same time. Serving can be exhausting when it's done out of fear. But if you serve in love, it's energizing. When you serve with love and you refresh others, you're going to be refreshed at the same time. Proverbs 11:25 says, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Now, nowhere in the Bible do I ever see Jesus saying that we need to have tough love and tough love will change someone. We can't allow fear, busyness, or stress to get in the way of serving others. We're only going to rob ourselves when we do. I've often said, blessed are the interruptions, for they too need God. And I have found that when I stop and I serve others, my schedule has this way of working itself out on its own, because I stopped and did what Jesus created us to do. Fear is going to cause you to be self-serving, trying to accumulate power by protecting and serving yourself. And if you're looking for a position where you've got a lot of people under you, become a caretaker of a cemetery. One of the things that'll help you keep your fear, hold on to your fear, is pride. And God warns us in Psalms 55:19, God, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change, he will hear them and humble them, because they have no fear of God. To walk in the fear of the Lord, to walk in the awe of God, is to walk in humility before God. And when we serve, we are not serving someone else. We are serving God, because Jesus said, when you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me. So how do we serve? Letter S, sacrifice. When you love, you serve. And when you serve, you sacrifice. Service requires a sacrifice of your time, your talent, your treasure, your touch. Sacrifice is the power of love. Luke 16:10 says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is disobedient with very little will also be dishonest with very much. Those who serve those who serve to gain power don't last. Those who serve and give their power away receive more power from those they serve. And when you serve, even in small ways, you're getting more opportunities to serve in bigger ways. Great leaders are never dictators. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Sacrifice. Letter E, eyes open. Put your head on a swivel and look around. You cannot keep your eyes on the ground. We have to look for opportunities to serve. Philippians 2, therefore I urge you, therefore if any of you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of self-ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but to each of you, to the interest of others. So, eyes open. Look for opportunities. So letter R, return his love. Return the love that you've received from Jesus Christ. 1 John 4:19, it says, we love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates his brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God, whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. Sometimes we are going to be the only Jesus that some will ever see. We don't have to use our words to return his love. Just return his love. Letter V, venture into new territory. So often Jesus stepped over the walls to serve others. The woman at the well, he stepped over social walls. He stepped over racial walls. He stepped over the difference between men and women in that day. What about when he reached out to these lepers and only one came back and gave him thanks? You know, Jesus was willing to do what nobody else would do, and he broke the rules is what he did. Because in that day you were to stay away from lepers. That woman, every reason to stay away from her because she was a woman with a questionable past. Everybody in town knew her reputation. To serve, we often have to step out of our comfort zone, and we need to talk to ourselves rather than listen to ourselves. The enemy's going to tell you every reason why you cannot serve. You're too old, you're too sick, you're too poor, you're not good enough, you just need a good excuse, and the enemy will give you one. When we fill our heart with the words of God, we begin to say, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Greater is he who is in me than he that is in the world. Matthew 7:12 says, do to others as you would have them do to you. Don't expect to be served by others until you're willing to serve others yourself. Jesus was willing to get his hands dirty to change other people's lives. He was willing to lose his dignity and allow others to question his motives so that God would get the glory. It's not about your ability, it's about your availability. And letter E is every day, in every way, pray. One of the greatest powers we have as believers in Jesus Christ is the ability to pray to God the Father for one another. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 18, it says, pray always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to the end with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. If you're just sitting there and all of a sudden somebody's name pops into your head, what has happened is God has put a sacred trust in you and invited you to enter into his presence and lift that person up in prayer. And you go, well, I don't know what to pray for them for. That's why we have the Holy Spirit and Jesus, because the Holy Spirit intercedes for us with moans and groans that cannot be uttered. And Jesus always lives to intercede for us. So we are most like Jesus when we're interceding for others. Let's go and look for opportunities to serve. Who is Jesus laying on your heart right now to go and serve? Go. Don't wait, because if we wait for perfect conditions, we'll never do anything. Bye-bye.